And we're back. It is COMP305. It's the winter 2016 semester, and it's week 6, part 1 of our broadcast. What we're going to be talking about today is the same kind of thing we were working on last day. So if you remember, we had a project we were working with. I'll see if I can bring that up. We're working with the project that was a 2D demo for platforming. Let's bring that up. There it is. So it's the winter. So up on GitHub, it'll be COMP305 Winter 2016 Platformer Demo. That's the one. And there's a new version of the Unity editor, which I'm going to deny. I'm going to say skip this version because it's just bad luck to start in the middle of our time. But I will upgrade, I swear. And we did this last day. We did the player. We added some physics, some basic physics. When I press play, just to remind you of where we were, we kind of did this. So the player kind of has a little bit of animation. We did the player animation. And when I use the right arrow, right, for the player, right, or left arrow or up arrow, right, it seems like it's not working today, but let's see why it's not working. Because it should be working, because we did the animation steps last day. But let's check it out and see. Maybe mine broke. Maybe I didn't save it. Who knows what happened? Is yours working? Because mine's not working today, right? All right, let's check it out and see what's going on. Why is it broken? So I'm going to go back to my scripts here, and I'm going to go to my hero controller. And again, this takes into account the animation steps, right? Remember we did that whole animation scenario last time? And okay, so we've got a bit of a move, and I'm looking at my input.getAxis horizontal and vertical. You guys should see this as well. And on update, what it's doing is this: it's saying every update as I'm pressing my keys. What it's going to be doing is it's going to be listening for the horizontal get axis or axis, right? That I'm going to use for my move, and my jump is only going to be on the vertical axis, but I'm ignoring the down button. Okay, so that's all I'm doing. So I'm saying if the move is not equal to 0, move. Remember when we get axis, just as a review. And again, I'll be asking you some of these questions on your little quiz that's coming up on Wednesday, tomorrow. One of the things I'll be doing is I'll say, so when you get input from the axis, right, you get a number between -1 and 1, right? And again, you're going to move. If the move is greater than 0, then we're going to our facing right is true. If it's less than 0, then our facing right is false. We're not facing right anymore, the character. And then what I'm going to say is, I got this flip method. Here's the flip method down here, right? So I'm going to say, well, flip every time if it's positive or negative. Remember, I've left you guys, with this code right here. If this facing right is, if this is true, then we do this with the new vector, and if it's false, we do this. That's the way it works. So it kind of flips from one side. We do the flip. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm scaling it on the negative axis. So as I scale, I flip my character from one side to the other. Okay, I'm not getting any input. It looks like for whatever reason, my input controls aren't working. Let's see why. Right. So first of all, the thing to check is, I always check this out, is let's see, take a look at my character controller. So here's under my first, for my prefab, I only have a crate, and I have a hero. Here's my hero, and let's take a look. I've got my sprite renderer and my rigid body 2D and my animator and all that kind of stuff, right? Where is from a hero perspective, where's my script? Somehow she'd be removed, right? If it was here, right? Take a look. I got my polygon collider, right? And I got my rigid body 2D. If you see what I'm seeing, then this is how it would look to you, right? And here's my sprite renderer. But for my hero, I don't see a script connected to it. So let's reconnect our scripts, and that's probably what the problem is. Somehow my script got removed. That's fine. So I'm going to kind of put this on there. And there's my script, hero controller. Just to make sure that the script is working properly, let's take a look at my script just as a review. Do I have anything that needs a connection, right? Remember, I'm using my transform, right, which is coming. I'm actually getting my transform from the game object itself, right? And I don't have any public variables that are exposed right now to the controller, right? Okay, so we've done that. Let's save the script, let's save the scene, and let's press play to see if I can get that animation. So there, I've got that. Now if I press the button, I can run one way, or I can run the other way. If I press the up button, I do my jump animation. All that stuff is working properly now. Okay, so that's one thing I need to do. So my hero is connected, right, as it was before. Okay, and probably what I did was I probably attached the script during the time I hit the play button. Remember I talked about this danger, right? And then what happened was when I stopped playing, I saved the scene, but the script was never attached to the character, right? So that's what probably happened, and it happens a lot. And sometimes what we want to do is change the color of our debugger. So when I press the play button, I know that I'm in debug mode. Right now there is a difference in color. Take a look. My color is a little bit darker gray. If I stop playing, see how it's light gray in the background? If I click play, it's dark gray. That sometimes is not enough for us to see that, right? And that's what causes some problems. Okay, so we need a way of moving. And I'm going to introduce a different way of doing that. We're in our script. Let's go back to that script for a second. And again, if you don't have this script, you can always download it from our GitHub. Just to confirm that GitHub is up to date, how do I do that? How do I confirm that my GitHub is up to date? I have no other changes or whatever. Now remember, I'm on the control. I don't have any GitHub integration, unfortunately, with Unity, right? I do have GitHub integration with MonoDevelop, right? If I look at version control, I do have the ability for me to push my changes and switch to different branches and all kinds of other stuff here within MonoDevelop, right? But when it comes to Unity, like the actual, all the files, all the assets and everything else, unfortunately for that, there is no GitHub integration. For example, here in the Unity side, I can't, connect so much with GitHub. So the best way to do that, of course, is to, and my recommendation to you, well, let me just close this up, is to close out of Unity. So first, let's save our scene. That's important because I did add something here to the player prefab, the player controller, which is going to be a prefab. And I'm going to close my Unity project down for a second. I'm going to navigate to my Unity project that's on my desktop by pulling up a terminal window or a command prompt. So I'm going to go CD desktop, and then from there I'm going to go into Unity projects, and then I'm going to do directory listing, right, to see which one it is, and it's this platformer demo, which with a window with a Winter 2016 in front of it. So it's COMP305, and there's different ways to do this. You can drag and drop too, platformer demo, but this is just another way to do it. All right, so let's do a git log so I can see what's going on. I have a couple of different commits here that I've got going on, right? I added my hero controller script right here. That was the last update I did, right? And the other way to check for Git is if I have any changes. So if I say an example is git add dot, right? I'm adding it in. I'm going to say git commit -m. And what I'm going to say for this one is connected player scripts hero object. That's what I just did, right? So you see that there was 7 files that had changed. So that I didn't upload to GitHub. So if you're looking at GitHub, I might be behind. That's what I was afraid of. So I'm going to say, git push, right? Origin master, and now you guys should have everything. Once this push is done, GitHub should be up to date. Let's take a look at GitHub for a second, because one of the things I always get down on you guys on for is, hey, you guys didn't do your commits properly, right? So if I go to GitHub, if I look at Centennial College, and if I look at my platformer demo now that's just updated 15 seconds ago, I can see that I have 7 commits for this little project, 7, right? Including my initial commit, my README file, my platformer assets, updated my tile map, I changed my animator controller, I added my hero script, and then I connected my player script to the hero object, which is probably, I should probably call this the hero controller. But that's fine. So these are all the commits, and it's been a very short time. It's like we haven't done a lot. Like for this project is like kind of still new, right? But lots of commits. And what I'm looking for from you when you do your project, whether it's your assignment 2 or if you're looking at an idea of how I rate your committing, from a GitHub perspective, is if you do things as you go. That's the idea. Is use version control as you go, so that way you know, it's part of your workflow, right? I don't want you to do this last minute stuff where you're like, Tom asked me to do stuff for assignment 2. He asked me for Git, so I'm just going to throw it up on GitHub. It's good for a backup, but that's it. It's not really version control. Version control is you do as you go, right? And it's a habit. You have to form a habit, just like commenting. Comments, it's a habit. If you don't remember, if you don't do it, then you have to go through and do it after. It's double the work. Do it as you go if you can remember. Okay, so let's go back to this piece and start off Unity again. And what I want to do here is add the next pieces that into my plan. But I wanted to stop there just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if you're going to look on it, you have all the things I have now, just in case you couldn't do what I did. Okay, so here's my player, and I want to kind of make movement happen, right? And I'm going to do a couple of new things here. So I'm going to go back to MonoDevelop. Here's my player controller, or my hero controller class in this particular case, and I could certainly add, you know, individual things in here like private member variables or public member variables that are, you know, for almost like a velocity minimum and a velocity maximum. I could do that, and I can call them vmin and vmax, and I can have more than one floating variable. But I want to show you what happens when we create almost like a little class, and how to serialize a class, because you may need to do this in one of your codes, and it might solve some problems for you. And when you say serialize a class, Tom, what do you mean? When I serialize a class, I make it available to my entire code base, right? In Unity, right? So let's try this out. I know I'm gonna move my character by pushing him. It's not going to be changing locations. I'm not going to change from one location in three-dimensional space, or two-dimensional space in this case, to another one. I'm not going to go move from XYZ to another XYZ, right? That's not how I want it to be. I want to use physics. And for physics, we need to imply force, right? So as we, you know, import force to this object, we're pushing the object, right? I want to be able to have a maximum velocity that this thing can go, right? So they can travel. Okay, so let's do this. So we're going to call this class velocity range. I'm going to start typing public, follow me here, class, just like we did before. Here's another class. And we're going to call this class velocity range. Here's our velocity range class. Remember that our class needs curly braces, just like any other class, right? The difference between this velocity range class and my hero controller class is that hero controller is, this is what the colon stands for from C#, if you remember, it extends the monobehavior superclass, right? That's where it comes from. All scripts by default extend from the monobehavior superclass. Of course, you can change that by just changing where it extends from. So velocity range is a new class we're creating. All right, so let's just put this as a kind of a utility class. Let's kind of mark it that way. So let's say velocity range utility class, which is what it is, right? Just adding some comments. This utility class, right now, the way I have it written, isn't available, right, to my entire code base. I want to make it available. We're going to do that in a second. First, let's just code the class. So I have some public instance variables that I want to add in here. Here's my public instance variables. And what I want to put in here is a couple of variables inside my class, right? So I want to say public, and it's going to be, of course, float. And we're going to call it just some longer names. And remember, this is going to be called velocity range, right? So it's going to be min, right? So min velocity, minimum. And we'll leave it at that, right? And then we'll say public float maximum. Now, maximum, minimum, you may say, what does that mean? Well, it's velocity range. So if the class is called velocity range, and if I instantiate a velocity range object, it's going to be velocity range minimum, velocity range maximum. Whenever you instantiate an object, I want it to speak to you. I want it to, when you look at what the methods of an object look like, whenever you write something, it doesn't matter whether it's for gaming or another language, it should speak to you. It should make sense when you're reading it. On my velocity range minimum, the minimum of my velocity range, or my velocity, whatever you want to call it. If it doesn't make sense, you've named your variables incorrectly, right? Okay, let's talk about our constructor. So here's our constructor for the class, right? And how do I make a constructor in C# again? You guys remember? Come on, guys. Public and the name of the class, right? So public, the name of the class, so velocity range, right? Here it is. And this is my constructor. I can have multiple constructors like we normally can. This is just C#, right? So if you know C#, as an example, we can do this. I'm also going to listen for, in my velocity range, 2 values. So I can in my constructor, I can initialize my 2 variables, my 2 member variables, minimum and maximum. So I'm going to just ask for them. So I'm going to say minimum and then float maximum. Now these, of course, are these variables here in my constructor are local variables that are only that live and die from a scope perspective in my constructor function, right? Or method. Okay, so this is my constructor. This is where they live and die. I want to assign them, and of course, I'm going to use the this keyword. So I'm going to say this, so that minimum, right, is equal to minimum, and then this dot maximum is equal to maximum. There we go. So minimum, maximum, right? Very easy. If I save this thing, that's a public class velocity range. If I go back up to C# and I look at my hero, right, as an example, I don't see anything, right? How about is it available to me in my class? So if I go back to my script for a second, just the way it's written here, I want to instantiate a variable of type velocity range, right? So I'm going to go into make it a public variable, right? So I want it to be available to my controller or my inspector. So I'm going to say here's my public instance variables, stuff that I want on the inspector. There's a piece I'm missing. Just look out for it. And I'm going to say public, and it's going to be of type velocity range. So I'm going to use velocity range, and then there's my velocity range. So there's my new class, right? Which is I want to make the thing called velocity range. Here's velocity range, my new variable. And that's I'm going to make a reference to it right there. So there's my new reference. In my start function, where I do all my initialization, right, as an example, I'm going to initialize some stuff, just like I've done move and jump and facing right and all that. I'm probably going to do it first. I'm probably going to kind of, before my transform, as an example, I'm kind of initialize all my public variables. So initialize, public instance variables first. Instance, I can say that. It's just a methodology or a convention I like to do. I like to try and put all my public and private separate. Initialize private instance variables. By the way, even if I was programming in C++, as an example, I always separate my public and private or protected instance variables, and I do it in this way. This is my way, right? You have to find your way. All right, so I'm going to initialize my variable, my velocity range variable. And remember, I need to have 2 values, minimum and maximum, that I'm going to assign here, right? So let's try this out. So say something like this. So I can go velocity range. So this dot velocity range then, right? When I'm assigning this object is equal to a new velocity range object, right? And I need two objects here. Or 2 floats, one that's a certain value for the minimum and the maximum, right? So let's use the minimum. I'm going to use this 300. So it's like a lot, right? But 300F, F for float, right? And the maximum is 1000F. Now, these are numbers that I'm going to work with for now, and we can kind of fool around with. Okay, cool. So I've got this velocity range and minimum and maximums. I've made it public, right? So this is a public variable. So let's see if we can see it in the inspector, right? How come? Saved it. Need to serialize it, right? And even though we're making it available, public velocity range, unless we serialize the class itself, right, so that it's available to our entire program, right, it's not available here in the inspector, even if you make it public. Let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to go back to here. So again, this would be a nice question on a test. If I was going to ask you a test, right? How do I serialize a class? I did that. I already asked you this for how do I serialize variable, right? And a private variable. And do I need this? I mean, I'm doing a lot of work here, and you might say, well, Tom, you really need to do that. You can just make two floating point variables and make them public, right? I want to give you more, right? That's why we're doing this kind of stuff. So I'm going to say in brackets again, above the class name, just exactly above, it's a filter or a modifier to the class. We're going to do system.serializable, right? System.serializable says, hey, take any member or anything that we've mentioned here and use it, make it available across my entire platform. So save that and go back to the inspector. And I'm going to kind of click away and click back. And you can see now that I have velocity range. Here's my velocity range object. And it has two values, minimum and maximum. Remember what we talked about before, why these variables aren't available where they are, right? Because I've initialized everything the way I have, right? Minimum and maximum start off at 0. Let me show you that. So if I go back to what they show in the inspector is 0. If I was going to go back to show you this, we talked about this. If you initialize everything here, right, my velocity range is equal to new velocity range 301,000, because I'm doing it upon start, right, as an example, then in the inspector, no good. Is there another place I can initialize everything? In the? Could do that, but it's a class. You know, I don't want to initialize stuff in my class typically, right? And because I want to change stuff around, right? I don't want to hard code anything. I hate hard coding. I think it's bad. We'll talk about this. So how do I do that? Let's see. There is another method that starts off before start. Who knows what it is? Awake. Let's see if that helps us. So if I sit there and I go something like, you know, let's use the, you know, we'll test the awake method. See what it does, because we haven't done that yet. Awake method. What I'm going to do here is call it void awake, right? Just like we did the last time, you know, how we did start. And I'm going to take this stuff here and transport it from here into my awake, just to see if that makes any difference. Save that. So upon awake, and you know, I got something. Do I see any difference between, you know, start and awake? And the answer is no. You're going to ask why. And the reason why is because even when we instantiate our new object, right, it's too late. The inspector is built, right? You might say, well, Tom, we're initializing before we start off, right? That's great. But what I'm trying to tell you is the view we see in our inspector, it's dynamic, right? And it's built, right, before runtime, right? So you got to figure this out. The only time that awake and start fire or trigger is during runtime. Am I running right now? No. So I have to do something where it's going to affect the editor, right, ahead of time. And there's nothing I can do to do that beyond in my script itself at the top. And this is where I kind of don't like it. I don't like it this way. I could put my initialization up here, right? So as I declare my class, I haven't initialized yet, and it's before any other kind of thing, it initializes my variables if I want them to be exposed. And if you guys find another solution, I'd like to hear it. But this is the way. So if I take this and I cut it out of here, and I'll fix this, and I put it up here in my velocity range, there it is. And I go down here and kill this awake, because I'm going to do this awake. That's why I said test the awake method, because I don't need it, right? Okay, cool. And I save, and I go back, and I kind of go back and forth now, right? I'm hoping that this will update, right? What did I do wrong? How come it's not showing me my minimum and maximum? And now you're going to hurt me for this one. I did it here, like it tells me to do in the book, right? It tells me to do this, you know, online. Shows me that I can, you know, instantiate my objects here. Why isn't this working here at all? Anybody? The constructors called it runtime, right? So it doesn't really matter. The answer is it doesn't matter. I have to give it some values, right? And that's why I'm going to undo everything in a second and go back to the way it was. And because my constructor has, this object has two properties, here and here, right? Like somebody mentioned, I could give a default value in my constructor to my objects. Maybe that would work. I'm taking it from here, my minimum and maximum, right? That's where I'm taking it. So I am doing this, but my constructor is built, you know, only at runtime. Only at runtime, right? I don't have a default constructor, right? And even so, my constructor will be built at runtime. I'm calling upon a class, and therefore these two values don't work. What's a workaround? Anyone have an idea of a workaround to make this work? If I wanted to kind of show my values, these values I put in my code in the inspector. Let me just take this off again. So I'm going to kind of undo my changes. So we're going to go undo, 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 right? We're going to get to the point where my awake is gone. I don't need my awake anymore, and back to my start method. What's my other workaround here? Well, I could create some temporary variables that link to my editor, right, my inspector, and then I use these in here. That's what I could do. So public variables like minimum and maximum, right, that are exposed on the inspector. But if I've done that, then I really don't need to do this. Why am I doing this if I can do that? That doesn't make any sense. So the other way to do it is do it hard coded here in the inspector. So I can go in here and go 300, like actually go physically in there, and it'll remember, right? And if I put a maximum of 1,000, right? So I can save that, and then when I come back, those values will be there, right? And then I can change those values as I go, right? But what I really was hoping is that these values would be shown as I run things. So let me just test this thing to make sure it doesn't error out, right? So you see that there's no errors, otherwise my code wouldn't run. And I just have some console just to tell me what I'm doing with my movement right now. Okay, let's get back. So I've serialized my class. I've broken it up so I have a minimum and maximum velocity. I need those two things. I need a couple of other things. I need a speed force, right? Not like the Flash speed force. Okay, if you're watching the Flash, it's not the speed force from the Flash. Okay, it's speed force as in when I push, how much force maximum can I give, right, to the object, right? And the other one would be jump. What vertical jump force am I giving my character, right? Now we have to test these numbers out because 300 and 1,000 mean nothing to you right now. You'll see what I'm talking about, right? All right, so let's code those in. So I'm going to go back to my over here, and inside my as a public member variable again, I'm going to create a couple of objects, right? So we're going to call this public, and then inside here we'll call it a float, and we'll say speed. Now you might say move speed, movement, whatever you want to call it, but see, speed is okay, right? And again, I'm going to initialize it here just because, you know, actually, I'll show you again, just so that you get it in your head how it works, right? So here's my speed, and then public float, and we'll call it jump. Now we've already have a jump variable like this, right? And I already have another one called move, right? So what do I really want to call these things? Is there a better name for speed and jump that anyone can recommend? Remember, this is going to be exposed in your inspector. So if you were to write a class for somebody else to consume, so let's say you make a class for somebody else, and they're going to use it, you don't want it to be confusing. So what would you call it? Jump speed, and then I like force, jump force and speed force, or speed, you know, what you want to call movement force would be probably the better thing instead of speed, right? Because that's really what we're adding. So movement, we'll call it move force, like this, move force, and jump force, right? Because those are the two things we're using, jump force. So you know it's a force. It's not speed as in like we're just moving a variable from a location, from one location to the other. So that's a better name for our variables, I think. Okay. All right, let's just initialize them down here for the first time, and I'll show you again just so you see it. This dot move force, right? We'll initialize it with 50F, and this dot jump force, we'll initialize that at 500F. Plot, right? Okay, let's take a look and see if do I see that in the inspector. So I go back, right? I should see something come back, and there's zeros. Okay. Again, I'm just showing you this. Now, to me, I'll tell you right now, by the way, if you minimize, see how if I can collapse, because this is a class that contains two properties, it's almost like a group. It creates almost like a group in my inspector. I can collapse my class from my velocity range from 300 to 1,000, and sometimes it's good like that. So could I create a class, if I didn't care about initializing automatically, could I create a class that you can think of for move force and jump force, right? That, you know, that I want to use, that I can serialize, that I can use somewhere else, right? If I need to. Any idea? The force class. But maybe the force class is taken, huh? Because we are doing Unity, right? So it might be taken if I do the force class. So I'm just saying, just be careful. That's why I call it velocity two words. So let's make it a class that's like two names. you know, huh? Player force or hero force, something like that. We could do that, but that's so specific to the hero. What if I want to use it for the enemy, or I want to use it for something else later on? I want to reuse my class. What was that? Game force could do that. Game forces or movement force, something like that. That's pretty long. Move force, but that move force is here, right? So it's got to run. It's got to go, right? Move force move, right? Move force jump. Doesn't make any sense, right? So if I go force jump, that means like I'm not using the force. We're not playing Star Wars, right? So I'm not using the force jump, right? But something like that. So I want you to think about it. I'm not going to do it yet. I'll leave it as is, and I'll just put the values in here. So I'll say 50 for my move, and jump will be 500. And it's the right thing to do. I'll tell you why. Because if I go back to my code, I really want to avoid initializing variables up here, even though they'll appear in the inspector. And for Unity, it's okay. I really hate it. It drives me crazy, right? It's like, it's really poor programming to do that. You want to initialize everything down here, right? And we'll talk about the way to do that later on. Okay, cool. So I've got my move, my jump, and my move force, my jump force. I've given it default values here, but I've also given it default values there just in case I forget, right? Okay, cool. And when I have my move force and my jump force, I can use them now, right? So once I have my numbers, I can start going into it and start using this stuff. Okay. So we've already instantiated a couple things. I've got my transform. I've got my animator, you know, as an example. I want to be able to, when and by the way, I don't have any sounds yet. I haven't attached any sounds to my character, but I could. And we will do that later on. But what I want to do is, when I start off, right, as an example, I also want to create a simple forces, some temporary force variables that I'm going to use for force X and force Y, right? Now notice right now we have everything we're doing in our update, right, is happening in this update. Now remember what I talked about. What's the better update method to use when we're doing anything with physics? Fixed update. Now the great thing is with Unity, we just have to change this name. So from update to fixed update. So let's do that. So we're changing the name from update to fixed update. So this is where all this stuff is happening, right? With the move and the jump and everything else and the get access, this is where we're going to get all our information in fixed update. Let's check first before to see if it broke our game just by changing update to fixed update. And let's press play. And then, you know, we'll see that everything is good. We're still good with update and fixed update. It doesn't change anything, right? So we've added those things in there. Right? So we know that. And I want to create some temporary variables here to kind of hold our forces. And I'm going to set them to 0. So I'm going to say float force X, so the force along the X-axis as an example. And again, you can see this is potentially a class as well, right? Is equal to 0F, right? And float across the Y-axis, because X and Y is all we care about, is also 0. What I want to do is we want to tap into the rigid body part of our component, right? Because whenever we do physics, right, for our character, we need to tap into the rigid body. Our transform component, our transform is one aspect, right, when we talk about our X and Y coordinates. But our rigid body taps into the physics part. And we don't have a tap into that. When I say tap, a hook. We have a couple hooks. We have transform and we have animator. But we're missing rigid body. So let's add that in, right? So again, notice how I initialize them there and I declare them up here. I think I want to make my rigid body or access to my rigid body just like we did here, a private variable. So we'll do that next. So we'll say private, right? And we'll call this rigid body 2D. Remember, because we're in a 2D world, not a 3D world. If it was a 3D world, we'd do rigid body by itself, right? And we'll call this underscore rigid body, right? Because I want to make sure that it's, you know, we have access to it. Inside of our initialization, inside our fixed update, we're going to say this dot underscore rigid body, and we'll do the same kind of connection. We'll say game object dot get component. By the way, you can always do get component by itself. You might see that in the code, but I like to do it this way to be explicit, right? There we go. So rigid body 2D. So I've made a connection with my rigid body 2D component. Let me look and see what I'm talking about here. Looking at the character, I have my rigid body 2D component. What else do I have here that I can access? Well, I can access things like my mass, and my linear drag and my gravity scale, all these things I can do now through code because I've made a connection, a reference to my rigid body 2D component in my hero character, right? Okay, cool. I also have the ability for me to do collision detection and all that kind of stuff. But more than that, I have the ability in my rigid body to do velocity, because velocity itself, the speed, if you will, imparted by a force is held as a property inside my rigid body. You don't see it here. There is no velocity inside exposed on the inspector, but actually it exists as a property to the rigid body 2D. Let's take a look at that from our API perspective, because it's always good to know the APIs. So if I was going to go to rigid body 2D for Unity, right, you can see that on the scripting API, it tells us what my rigid body 2D is, right? Here's all my variables. These are all my properties, if you will, right? So I've got drag, I got freeze rotation, I got gravity scale, some of the stuff you see on the inspector, position, rotation, simulated sleep mode, velocity is what I'm looking at. My linear velocity is what we're going to be using, right? And if I click on velocity, you can see that it gives you an idea of the velocity is what it is. It's a component, and there's more of an X and a Y directions, but there is no Z direction in 2D physics, so there is no Z component. Now remember, just like we have in other things, we cannot directly assign the value for my velocity by going velocity X is equal to. Can't do that. What we need to assign is a vector, right? We use vectors all over the place with this thing. So how do I do that? Well, there's a couple ways to do this. And one of the things I like to do is, first of all, if I was going to look at the code so far that we've got our our forces. We've initialized to 0, temporary forces. What I want to do now is I want to kind of create an absolute velocity. Why would I care about absolute velocity? First of all, what's an absolute number? Let's go math again. Absolute numbers. It's a number that has no sign, right? It's positive only, right? If I get the absolute value of a number, positive or negative, I'm going to get a positive number. And why do I care about that with velocity? Because in this 2D world, my friends, you can have positive velocity and negative velocity going one way or the other. It's a direction. That's what velocity gives us, a direction vector, right? We want to cancel that out, because if I get a negative velocity, if I'm testing for velocity, speed of the character, and I get a negative, it's always going to fail, right? My condition won't work properly, is what I'm saying. So I want to get the absolute value of those numbers. So let's do that. So I'm going to say one of these. I'm going to say float absolute value of velocity x, right? Follow me here for a second, is equal to, here's a function, mathf. That's the math function in Unity, mathf, right? Absolute, right? So it's the absolute value of this, that underscore rigid body, right? Rigid body, 2D, of course, because we don't have a rigid body. Did I call it rigid body? Oh, bad, Tom, bad. I shouldn't call it rigid body. I need to call this rigid body 2D. How do I rename this thing? Right click, refactor, rename. We want to rename this thing to what it's supposed to be, which is rigid body 2D, right? If I don't do that, guys and girls, what's going to end up happening is I can mistake things for what they are. Okay, let's go back. So I'm going to go back down to here. So rigid body 2D is what I'm looking at. So I'm going to go dot underscore rigid body 2D. There it is, right? So I know what it is. And I want to get the absolute value of my velocity dot x. So I'm getting that value, right? So whatever the value of my velocity x, I'm assigning it to this absolute velocity x for my rigid body. All I'm doing is assigning. So I'm saying take the rigid body 2D, whatever the velocity x is, the value of my x velocity. That means across horizontal, right and left, right? And assign it to this absolute velocity x. Is there a better name for the variable? We'll talk about that later. Okay, let's go on. So again, we need the other one. Y would be in the positive direction, up and down, right? So absolute velocity y, right then, if you want to talk about this, again, is mathf. That's the function. And mathf has a lot of different functions. Tangent, arctangent, ceiling, clamp. We can use some of these functions, and we will later on in our gaming, right? Min and max, some interesting stuff here. It also has pi, if you want to use convert things to radians and so on. Lots of good stuff there. So we're going to say, we just need the absolute value one, and we'll say this dot underscore rigid body 2D dot velocity dot y, right? And that's what this is. So we're getting the absolute value of the x and y velocity numbers. So get absolute value of velocity for our game object. And so whatever it is, it's going to be a positive number, right? So if it's nothing, if it's not zero, all I'm saying here, when I do the absolute value, right, means if it's not zero, I don't care if it's if I've got a negative sign, I've got movement. If I've got movement, I need force. That's what's happening, right? What's the force? All right, so I need something else. I need to kind of do this. I've got my move. Here's my move, which is my horizontal value, right? And again, this is a number that I get, a number between 0 and 1, right? So I'm going to say, here I'll add a little comment. So gets a number between -1 to 1 for both horizontal and vertical axis, right? That's what it does. That's what this part does, right? So I get my absolute number, I get my movement, and then I've already checked to see if I'm moving, right? And if I'm moving, if I'm moving, that's good, right? I'm moving around. But here's something. If I add a force to my character and he's not on the platform, right? Can he move? If I'm pressing my buttons around right now, and if I'm not on a platform, I'm in space, should I be able to move my character? That's my question to you. If your answer is yes, maybe your character has a jetpack, right? Because there's no other way he's going to move unless he's like on solid ground, right? Or maybe he's in space somewhere, right? You know, some kind of, maybe you're making it so that it has, but otherwise, characters don't move around on a platform unless they're physically grounded, right? That means that I need some other kind of way of detecting that I'm grounded. Now, there's some really interesting ways to do this. One way is to actually use a collider, right? So I can create a collider, right? And then the collider, I can check to see if my player is colliding with the other collider. And if I am, I'm grounded, right? That's the cheap and dirty way to do it. I'm going to warn you that that method is not always the best method, right? Because that means, and it's hard for me to draw this out. Let's do this in fireworks for you lovely people, right? So you can see what I'm talking about here, right? I got to tell you, I got to show you, because if I tell you, it's not effective. You won't see what I'm saying, right? So we're going to open up a new file here, and we'll make this so the game is 640 by 480 with a transparent background, and I'm going to add in a platform, all right? I'm just going to add in a platform here. Okay, here we go. Here's a platform. And let's make the background color for this platform, I don't know, something like brown, right? There we go, a brownish platform. And I've got my character, right? I got my character, and I want you to tell me, I'm going to open up my character. Let's look and see if I can find that. So I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to go to my Unity projects, which I have where my stuff is, just so we give a real life example. And when I go to this platformer demo, right, and inside my assets, inside my my sprites, right, or maybe it's in my sprites or whatever, I want to get my hero sprite that I got in there, and I've got this one idle sprite that I like to use. Let's just use this one. There we go. Doesn't matter. This one, right? So I'm going to copy this sprite just to show you what I'm talking about and paste them over here. So let's say this is more of a real life illustration instead of using a board, because the board I can draw stuff, but it won't click to you, right, until I do this. Okay. And let's just zoom in so we can just, you don't care. This is 640 by 40, but here's the guy. And let's assume that the hero, woo, he falls down on the thing. Boom, he's landing on this thing. Hey, now would you say this guy's grounded? Is he on the ground? Yeah. How about now? Okay. How about now? If he's using a collider, the answer is yeah, right? The answer is yes. And this poses a problem. That means if I touch my head on another platform, now I'm grounded. Now I can move around on my head somehow, right? How about over here? Yes, right? That means I can stick to the side of my platform, right? And I'm grounded, right? Which is wrong, right? And the same thing goes with over here, right? How about even weirder? How about here, right? That's kind of a weird thing. So, or even, remember, it's colliders, right? Depending on how I draw my collider, it could be like his hair would be like the one that's holding me up, right? That's what it would look like. That doesn't make any sense, ladies and gentlemen, right? It's easy, it's a fast and dirty way of doing it, and there's other workarounds, right? I'm not saying this is the only. If you use a different kind of collider, I mean, it can make it better, but this doesn't make any sense. What we'd rather do, and this is what we do in the actual demo as well. If I pull this guy up here, right? I want to draw an invisible line, okay? I want to draw an invisible line from the center of the character somewhere, right? That draws down to here. Let me just draw this line. So we'll give it a little bit of you know, color, make it red, right? Here's my red line. Let's make it a little bit thicker so you can see it up there from back in the rafters, right? There you go. Here's a red line. And imagine if I've got this red line, right, in front of me, right, as I'm walking. I'm going to connect it to my character now for a second. So, and again, bear with me with the illustrations here, but I want to put it slightly somewhere in the middle of the character, okay? And he's casting somewhere down here, all right? Okay, let's test this out. I'm going to kind of take my line and take my bitmap. This is my character, and I'm going to group them together so you can see what they look like. Yay. Okay, cool. Is my line right now, is my line touching my platform? Yes. Therefore, if my line touches my platform, I'm grounded, right? I walk around. Is my line touching my platform? Yes, 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 yes. Whoa. How about now? I'm not grounded anymore, officially, right? This is a great technique that we're going to be using for our enemies. Think about this. If I come to this point and my line that I'm drawing, invisible line coming from my character, isn't grounded, that means the answer is no. I have no ground left right in front of me. It's almost like I'm looking ahead, okay? So this is great for enemies, not so great for characters. What we're talking about here when I say invisible line is called line casting, right? It's like ray casting, right, but in 2D. 2D, we use line casting. And there's a couple of things we can do here. Let's go back and put my character back here, just from a philosophical perspective here, right? I'm going to undo, and I'm going to ungroup my character for a second so you can see the line. So this is a nice idea, this line that we're going to draw here. But maybe what we want to do instead, right, is modify this line. Here's our line. Modify this line so that the line is actually somewhere else, right? We don't want to do this, right? Because that doesn't make any sense. I want to move my line here. Let's just get another line, right? I want to kind of draw from the top of my character kind of straight down. Let's talk about this. Maybe this is a better line. Okay, see that my character has got a line from here straight down. Okay, cool. And I'm going to take this line and my bitmap now, and I want to group it, right? So I'm going to kind of group this up. There we go. Okay, is my character touching the platform? Is my line touching the platform? Yes. And how about here? Yes. But when I come to here, he's not anymore, so I can't move further than that. I can't, if I press the move button, no good. So this is a problem, right? Again, it's like I got to figure out where I can put this thing, right? Where I can cast my line so I know that it makes sense where the character, where the platform is, right? So again, it poses some issues with this kind of stuff. So maybe I can do both. I can do this. If I'm colliding and you know, and or my character's line's pushing down, I could do that. Then I'm kind of doing the same thing, right? Definitely here, no collision, right? There's no line casting here, so I'm not grounded here. It solves this problem. I'm not grounding over here. I'm not grounded over here or over here. The only time I'm grounding is down here, right? This is important to show you this piece, right? I want to try and get this ground piece, this thing I'm talking about, as close to the middle of the character as possible, right? Now, it's going to be minimal, but if my feet, and this is the trick, if my feet are very big, it's going to propose a problem for me, okay? Just FYI, because it's going to look like I'm grounded, but really I'm not, right? This is a programming problem for you, right? How do you do this? Here's another thing we can use the line cast for. How about this, right? So I've got my thing like this. I've got another line that goes here. So I got two lines, right? And this other line, I'm just going to group them with these objects. So group. There we go. I got my object here, and I'm walking around. And, you know, as an example, and this is great, and this line here can detect the edge of a platform, like, for example, this, right? So this is an alternate way of doing collisions. Am I touching the platform in front of me? Yes, I am. Am I touching the platform in front of me over here? No, I'm not, right? I can't do this way, but this makes sense. If I want to hook onto a platform, whoa, I connect it. So I can do this, but then these ones will fail, right? That's the advantage of using line casting, okay? By the way, if I was an enemy, right, I'm just going to undo my grouping for a second, ungroup my lines, and let's just take this line here and we'll extend it. How about if I did this with my enemy, right? So these are all invisible lines, by the way. You wouldn't be able to see them. So if this guy was my enemy instead of my character, what does this represent? Potentially. Anybody? Sorry? Access? Think about this as his line of sight, right? If my character, if I had another character, so let's say if I took this guy here and ungrouped them, just give me a second here. And we'll use an enemy. Actually, you know what? Let's load the enemy, right? Why not? We'll load the enemy up so you can see what it looks like, right? So here's my hero. I'm going to go to sprites, and let's load the enemy sprite for a second because we're going to use him in a second anyway. Here's my idle animation for my enemy. Here's what he looks like, right? This is the enemy that I'm going to be using. Copy him. I'll move him over here, and I'll paste him, right? There he is. And here's my enemy, right? So my enemy is quite big, right? And let's move the line so that he's in front of the hero. So we'll move this hero object over here for a second. And let's get rid of this line, okay? So we can use line casting for a couple things. Here's the other way we can use it. So imagine if the enemy has eyes on the hero. Does the line, this line intersect with the hero? The answer is yes. If the line intersects with the hero, the enemy can see the hero. If the enemy can see the hero, I can do a lot of things. I can do things like fire at the enemy, fire a bullet. Now that I can see the hero, I can fire a bullet. It's a condition that I can set up. What am I doing? AI, simple AI. I can set up artificial intelligence, say, well, I see you, now I'm gonna fire a bullet at you. But before, because I'm not seeing you, I wouldn't fire a bullet. I'm not gonna keep firing bullets for no reason, right? I can also use line casting for triggers. Like for example, if I was gonna make a trap, for somebody. So the line is there, and once the character crosses the line, the trap is triggered, right? Like a collider, but a little bit more crazy than that, right? One thing is that the line will move. My line will move along with the enemy, right? So if I group the line together with the enemy, let's just try this out here. So here's I'm grouping, right? And if I move my character, my enemy goes over here. My line is pretty long, right? I can detect my character, even if, as an example, my character happens to be on another platform, like, as an example, like way over here somewhere outside of the screen, right? He's on another platform, but my enemy can see him. He's going to fire the bullets, even on the other platform. Well, as long as my line touches him, and I can have my enemy. This is the great thing about enemies, right? I can detect if my enemy's on the platform, and if he gets to the end of my platform, and if he doesn't detect my character, he'll just turn around and go the other way, like a patrol. I can patrol on the platform. I can go one way. I don't see my character. I'm not going to fire. I'm going to keep going the other way. And when I see my character, I'm going to stop moving. I'm going to fire my bullet, right? Line casting. We're going to do all that with line casting. All right, so enough talk. Let's do it. Let's just show you how this works. Actually, we'll just do this. We'll go back. I'll come back to this picture in a second. One thing I want to do, by the way, is with my character, I want to go whoop on top of the enemy's head, right? If I top of the enemy's head, he's done, right? What I don't want to do, and the same thing with the enemy, if my enemy goes on top, jumps on top of my hero like this, right, which I could do, maybe he can die as well. Or even if he touches him at all in any way, the hero would die, right? All right. So hopefully you understand the concept now of line casting. Now we're going to see how it's going to work. So back to the script. So I want to create this ability for me to detect if my hero is grounded, right? I want to detect if my hero is grounded. And this is kind of an advanced topic, but I think it's probably great if we tackle this earlier, right? Because if we don't tackle this early, then we won't really know how to use it later when we do enemy. So it's better to tackle it for the hero first. Okay, let's go back up here. Lots of stuff we're doing so far, right? And we still haven't moved a bit, right? And the reason why I can't do moving because I need to detect if I'm grounded. Like I said, if I'm not, I can't move on the platform unless I'm on the platform, right? Which makes sense. Rigid body will take care of the movement type, but I need to see if I'm actually on the platform or I'll float in space somewhere, okay? So how do I want to do this? Well, I need to declare this is grounded kind of thing as a private variable. That's what I recommend. So let's do that. So I'll say private, and I'll say, we'll call it, and again, some of these things is what it is. It's Boolean, so here's bool, right? And just like we did facing right, we'll say underscore is grounded, right? Is grounded. Okay, cool. So what I want to do now is after I've declared my variable, at the start, just like I've done with the other stuff I've got going on here, with my move and my jump and my facing right and everything else, in my start method, I want to set up if he's grounded or not. And this is where it kind of gets a little crazy, right? I need another point. That's part of my character, right? My character right now has a starting point. What would be his starting point? If I was gonna draw my line, my invisible line, I need a start point and an end point for the line, right? That's how lines work. Start and end. I've got my starting point. It's just transform, right? My transform x and y coordinate for where the player lives in two-dimensional memory, right? But I need an end point. How would you recommend that I have an end point that I can draw? And I want to be able to modify this end point in my editor, right, as I'm playing. How would you recommend it? Francis, what do you think it would be? I want to have another end point. It's not part of the character, but I want to have it. What could I use? Make it a variable. It's a variable. Yeah, okay, it's a variable. It's going to be connecting, but I need something so that the character can draw the line. There's no line that's going to be drawn. I can't draw a line without a beginning point and an end point, and it needs to be something solid that's part of Unity, right? I love you, man. You're amazing. I love your thinking. Empty game object is what I need. Why? Because I need this ability for me to create something in two-dimensional space where I can cast my line to, an empty game object. The empty game object has to be a child object of my hero object. And we haven't talked about child and parents yet. Not too much, but let's do it now, right? Lots of concepts today. All right, so here's my hero object. Let's add this sight line, or whatever you want to call it, first. I want to call it the line of grounding, or whatever you want to call it, right? You could always call it down sight, like I'm looking straight down. So if my down sight, or I don't know how you want to call it, but there could be other things to notice as well. I could have sight ahead. I could have sight down, and the reason why I'm saying sight, think about it as seeing, to be able for me to detect it, like my line. I'm casting a line down. If my line down hits my ground, I know I'm grounded. If I'm casting my line ahead, if my sight ahead sees the other character, like if I'm an enemy, I can see. I saw the character. I'm going to fire my bullet, or I'm going to run to him instead of walking. Normally I was walking. Now I'm going to run to try and get him. Right? Okay. So line casting. So I need another object. So right click. I'm going to go create empty, and it's going to be part of my empty object. And we're going to rename this thing so it makes sense. We're just going to call it sight. Right? Sight down. Right, so the sight down point is the point in space that's from the hero, the center of the hero object, to the sight, to the down position, right? All right, I want to focus on this thing so we can see it on the screen. So if I go F to focus and I zoom out, notice that the position of the sight down empty object is in the exact same center as the hero, and you can see it kind of right here. I want to move it, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use my W key, or click on these buttons so I can see the object. So there it is. You can't see it. It's kind of in two-dimensional space right now. And I want to put it so that it is, notice how it was right here. This is the center of the hero, right? And that doesn't make any sense. My hero is a weird shape, yeah? My hero's got a big head. Too big, right? I'm just saying, right? So I'm probably want to cast it somewhere here. This makes sense, right? So that my hero is always looking down and back a little bit, right? You might also think that putting it to the heel is okay, but I like to try and put it in the middle of his body, right? So that he's grounded. Now it's going to present other problems. I don't want to put it here because that means that he won't be touching the platform. I want to put it so it's here, just below the platform itself, right? So that I can jump from the platform, right? And I want to put it as close to the bottom of his feet as possible. So as long as his feet have passed through the platform, I'm grounded. Now, again, my positioning is minus 14.2 if you want to match me, and minus 34 based on what the hero is. This is relative positioning based on the hero's coordinate system. The hero has his own coordinate system, his own world. Each object in Unity is a container, right? And by the way, you guys have heard me before say this in other languages, like, for example, in 3JS for COMP305. All objects are container objects. So too are they in Unity, right? Where my hero has another object called sight down. It's an empty object, and all it's doing is we're going to draw a line from here, from the center of the object, down to this thing here. Okay, so we got our sight down object. Yay, save. Let's go back to our code. Okay, cool. Now we need the ability for me to connect, our sight if you will, right? And it's going to go from one part to the other part, right? I need almost like my transform position, that's what I need to do, to my ground check, you know, as the way to think about it. And maybe that's a better name for this thing. Instead of my sight down, we'll just call it ground check. How about that? That makes more sense. Ground check. Here's my ground check, right? So from my hero position to my ground check. Cool, cool, cool. But do I have access to my ground check, right? And the answer is right now I do not have access to my ground check. I wouldn't have access to it unless I created it as a public variable that I can drag and drop, and it's going to be a position in 2D space, right? In fact, if anything, what does it need to be? It needs to be a vector, yeah? Because if I don't have a ground check vector, and now it has, remember, because it's a game object, right? It's a game object. I'm looking for everything for this game object. I'm looking for a position, location, and scale, and rotation, and the whole thing, because my object is a two-dimensional object that has forces impinged upon it. So it has to be a transform. Let's go back to that. So if I go back up to here, I've got a public variable that I'm gonna put together called ground check. Let's do this. Here's the first one I'm doing, ground check. So it's going to be of type transform. And I'm going to call it ground check, just like we made it right here. I could make it so it's ground check, right? Just to make it a little different. And what I want to do here in my start method, because it's a public variable, I'm going to do it over here. I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say, in my start, I'm going to say this dot ground check, right, is equal to what? Well, I could explicitly, you know, talk to the hero's object, which is the empty. But if I initialize it here, the coding is a little bit tricky, right? And I haven't really tagged this number, this thing. I could tag it. I could get my tag name and so on. But the easiest thing for me to do is drag and drop it, yeah? Let's try and see what I'm talking about here. Once I put a ground check variable that's part of my hero, here it is. Here's ground check. It's looking for a transform. What can I do? Drag and drop from the ground check empty object into my ground check transform here. So now I have a reference for this object, this empty object, which is just pointing down here, right, inside my code. Guys, don't worry if you don't get this all, because we're going to do it again for the enemy, right? Okay, so here's my ground check. It's pointing right down here to the bottom of my hero. And all I did was drag and drop from the empty object down here to my ground check variable. And if you look at my code, here's my code. I created a ground check transform, public transform, and I haven't done anything in my start because it doesn't make any sense. Okay, cool. So now that I have my ground check, and now that I have my is grounded, and this is where we'll stop and take a short break after this, right? I want to initialize it in my start method. So on start, as soon as my character starts, I want to initialize my ground check, right? But I also want to do it every frame, right? So I want to always check to see if my character is grounded or not, right? So I can initialize my ground check as not grounded or grounded, true or false or whatever. But I'd rather do it on a fixed update perspective. Now, does it really matter where I do this? The answer is yes, it does. Because I'm going to do my checks for my movement and my jump, but I need to know if he's grounded, and I need to know if he's absolutely positioned. So probably somewhere either after or before these temporary force variables is where I want to do it. Let's do it before everything, right? I want to say something like this. This dot is grounded, right? And here's the craziness. When we start putting this, I want to use the physics 2D library. Here's my physics 2D library. And I want to say line cast. So cast a line. That's how this reads, right? I'm going to open this up, and it's going to say, from where? Well, I want to get from my transform position. Now, do I have a transform? I do. Here's my transform, right? So I'm going to say this dot underscore transform dot position. So this is from the hero's center to, right, to where? Where am I going to cast to? Look what it says here in my code hinting. To the end vector, right? Well, my end vector is actually going to be what I've defined up here, which is going to be my my ground check, which is the transform, right? So how do I do that? So I'm going to say, well, it's the transform position, so the ground check dot position, whatever that is. This is, by the way, there's many ways you can write this. Ground check dot position, right? So that's the first, that's the two things I need. So line cast, make a line between those two things. Yeah, that's first thing. That's part of my line cast. And this is where it gets a little funny to remember, right? The next piece is, what do I do to make sure that this number becomes, so this check, this is grounded as a Boolean variable, right? Right now I'm just casting a line. And the line cast returns true or false. That's what it does. It also returns the position of what I'm hitting, if I really want to. But for now, it's a true or false option, right? And that's what it is. And what I want to do here is, and this is where the stuff gets funky. So I'm just going to split it across two lines so you can see this. I'm just going to do one of these, okay? Just for positioning, just so you can see it on my screen, okay? So the next one is the layer mask. Layer mask. And what Unity does is it includes another way of detecting the layer that you're on, right? It's like a tag name, but what it does is it says, hey, if I'm connected to this particular layer on my game, then there's a collision. And you can actually ignore certain layers. For example, I want to use my line cast to hit my ground, but I don't want my line cast to hit the top of my, my enemy's head yet, right? So if I want to do that, this is grounded would say, okay, I'm good for if I touch the ground, but not for my enemy's head, right? How do I do that? This is where the funky stuff goes in. So just watch what I do here. So I say 1, and then a double open or less than sign, right? And then I want you to ask me what this is. I'm going to say layer mask, right? Layer mask, right? I'm going to space it later. And I'm going to use the name to layer property, where I can look at the ground. I don't have a ground yet, right? And depending on what it is, that's going to generate my true or false. So what am I really saying? If the layer that I'm hitting, right, is the ground layer, then make it true. That's what I'm saying, okay? It's a funny way of doing it, but what I'm actually using is a bitwise operator, right, to do this. It's funky. Do I expect you to remember this? Absolutely not, right? But I want you to see it and have seen it and copy this. If you use this, it's okay, all right? I don't expect you to know it because it's a little advanced line casting, and we're talking about it on week 6, right? So it's still quite early. But I want you to understand line casting, then you can do ray casting, which is a little bit different. Okay, so this is the check to see what the line is. I don't have a name to layer. I can't check ground because I don't have a ground layer, right? Let's set one up. Look at all the setup we're doing just to see if the guy's grounded. My God, right? That's why I told you, platforming, she be hard, right? Okay, notice that my layer over here, right? My hero's untagged, and I got a bunch of layers, and my layer is default. By the way, let's tag the hero as my player, my hero object. But if I look at my default, I want to add a new layer. Notice that there's other layers here: transparent effects, ignore raycast, water layer, my UI layer. I can add another layer, and this is part of the game layer itself. And in my game layer, we're going to add a new layer called ground, right? Now, remember, I'm not going to assign it to the player. That makes no sense. The ground layer has to be on the ground, the platform, right? So let's do that. Let's, for this check that we're going to be doing, let's do that. So I'm going to go back to the platform for a second, and notice that the layer is default. I'm just going to change the platform's layer to the ground. My platform, by the way. And it says, hey, by the way, do you want to set the layer to ground for all child objects as well? Yeah, do it. What I'm saying is this object here is now going to be considered the ground layer, this platform. And now when the hero connects with the ground layer, right, he's going to know that there's a connection. The line is going to be drawn, and when it connects with the ground layer, then the is grounded Boolean variable will be set to true. Oh. I think it's a great place to pause for the next piece before we start moving, right? Let's take a 5-minute break and come back, and then I'll activate all this stuff so it works.